Are you aware of a recent new study that the US Surgeon General's office put out that's documenting the effects of what they're referring to as a pandemic of loneliness and isolation? Through this study, they have found that loneliness and isolation can have the same effect on our body, at least as far as premature death is concerned, as somebody who smokes 15 cigarettes a day. They've also found that people have a 29% increased risk of heart disease, a 32% risk of stroke, and a 50% increased risk of developing dementia later on in life. Well, if you're like me, you might be wondering, what can we do to fix this? How can we even begin to address this? Well, that's what we're going to begin discussing today, as we're going to talk about the first of three barriers that I think helps contribute to this culture of isolation that we find ourselves in. I'm Steve, the lead pastor of Everrise Church, and you're watching the very first episode of Rising, our weekly running series where we talk about the culture, the Bible, and how we can apply it in our everyday lives. So, without any further ado, go ahead and roll that intro. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you guys are as excited for this as I am. I've never done anything like this before. I've never, really filmed devotions and had an ongoing little podcast or series like this. So I'm excited to get this thing started, and I hope that it's going to be beneficial, and I hope that you guys just really enjoy the content that we're going to be making. Here with this podcast, vlog, whatever you want to call it, we're going to talk about things in the culture, we're going to talk about the Bible, and we're going to talk about how to apply that to our everyday lives. And so, as we're starting this series off, one of the things that I really wanted to hit on and talk about, which is something I think that we all deal with, it's something that we've all done before in the past, it's isolation. And I think you can look around and you can see all the evidence of this just with the increased social media presence and people doing things online more, and we see that we have almost kind of created this culture of isolation that we're now living in. And if there's one thing that COVID showed us, it's how important human relationships and human interactions are. If you watch the intro, you already know some of the alarming statistics that can accompany what happens when we isolate ourselves and really when we just feel alone. And so, episode one, what we're going to talk about today is this first barrier of isolation that I've identified. And like I said, there's three of them that we're going to go through, three things that I think that just kind of put up these barriers in our lives that make us feel more isolated. And we're going to talk about how we can try to start breaking those barriers down. And so as we introduce this thing and as we go into it, the very first barrier that I want to talk about as far as isolation and loneliness is concerned is us, ourselves. Now, I don't know if it's just me, but I find that sometimes I do things or I make decisions that I know aren't popular or I know might be wrong. Maybe I know people won't approve of it. And so rather than to have to deal with that or approach those people or have these uncomfortable situations or conversations, I have a tendency to want to just withdraw. I want to isolate and I just want to stay to myself. And I think we all know that's probably not the healthiest way to deal with these things. Now, look, we know nobody's perfect. Everybody makes mistakes, myself included. And so it's not that we need to be perfect, but I think we can all agree, if we look into our own lives, if we look at ourselves in the mirror, that there are probably some things in our life that we could do differently or we could have done differently. And if you're anything like me, sometimes you think to yourself, well, if I just ignore it, or if I avoid that person or avoid that situation, then it'll just get better. But I think we all know that that's not the case. And maybe it's not necessarily that you've done anything wrong per se, but Maybe you've done something that you're just not sure that your family would agree with, or maybe you've done something and you feel like you're just embarrassed by it or embarrassed to talk about it with your friends or things like that. So what do? We withdraw. We hide away. We stop calling people. We stop hanging out with people. We stop texting people, and then we find ourselves in a pretty lonely boat. And when that begins to happen, um, we just have a tendency to make more and more bad decisions. We do more and more things that maybe we know we shouldn't do, but it's because we don't have anyone pouring into us. We don't have anyone um, that's there for us and holding us accountable and that's encouraging us. And so, what I want to bring our attention to today is a story in the Bible about this woman who found herself in a very isolated situation. And she had had some things going on in her life that she knew weren't right, that she knew her family didn't approve of, and she knew her village didn't approve of. And so rather than dealing with these issues and asking for forgiveness and trying to take care of it, what she did is she just hid. She isolated herself and she tucked herself away so that she wouldn't have to run into anybody. And the Bible story that I'm talking about, we see in John chapter 4. And I'm just going to kind of summarize it for you. We won't go through the whole thing today. If you want to go more in depth to it, I preached on this passage a few weeks ago. So I'll put the link at the end of this video if you want to go watch it and look at it. And I would encourage you to do so if you want to be able to see just the broader spectrum of the whole of this passage. But today I'm just going to kind of give you just the highlights, at least as far as it relates to the topic that we're talking about today, which is isolation. So we have Jesus. He was doing some ministry down south and he was traveling, he was heading north to do some more ministry. And so he ended up going through this area called Samaria. He found himself in this one particular city, and he and his disciples came up upon this well. And so they got to this well. They were hungry, they were tired. And so Jesus decided to just sit and relax. And he sent his disciples to go get something to eat. And so we see Jesus all alone at this well, and the Bible tells us specifically that it was about noon. And while he's sitting there, this woman comes up with her water jug to draw water, and Jesus begins to have this interaction with her. And one of the reasons, there's a few reasons, but one of the reasons that this is so weird is the time that this took place. You see, because it was normal and customary in that culture for all the women to meet together early in the morning. They would gather their water jugs. They would walk to the well. They would dip all their water, draw their water together, and then they would walk back to the village together. And that always took place in the morning time. Well, simply just because it was cooler during that time of the day. Around noon, the sun was at its highest point. It was the hottest part of the day. And so I don't know about you, but if I had to lug this giant jug of water, I'd rather do it when the sun wouldn't be beaming down on me and making me sweat more than I already had to. And so that was the case for most of the women in this village. But here we see this one woman who doesn't do that. She doesn't go with all the other ladies, and she doesn't do it early in the morning. She goes at noon. And as we go through this and as we find out more about this encounter, the reason that she chose to go at that time, quite honestly, was because she knew that she probably wouldn't run into anybody. She knew that she probably wouldn't have to see anyone or talk to anyone or hear anyone or see their judgmental glances or hear their little snarky comments. And so because she didn't want to deal with any of that, she just decided to go when no one else would be there. But this time it was different because there was somebody there, and it was Jesus. And so Jesus engages with this woman and he asks her for a drink. And she's a little annoyed by it, just through her response, because guys weren't supposed to talk to girls. Jews hated Samaritans and they would never talk to a Samaritan, right? And she just wants to be left alone, right? And so as they're having this encounter and they're going through this, Jesus asks her for a drink. She's like, "Look, why are you talking to me? We shouldn't be doing this." And so Jesus said, "Look, if you knew who it was that you were talking to, you'd be asking me for a drink." And then she responds very sarcastically to him. But he says something that really piques her interest. And what he tells her is, he says, "Everyone who drinks this water," talking about the water from that well, "everyone who drinks this water," he says, "will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst." And so when she heard that, it got her attention because in her mind, what she thought Jesus was offering was some magical water that meant she would never have to drink again. She wouldn't have to come back to the well, and she could avoid doing that part of her day just entirely. And it would actually be more of a reason for her to be isolated and not run the chance or the risk of being around people, right? And so when she hears this, at first she gets excited. Now, when Jesus offers this living water, as he calls it, by doing some background research and knowing the passage, I'm 100% confident that he's not talking about literal water there. He's talking about the Holy Spirit, right? And he sees that she doesn't have a relationship with God, and so he's offering her this as a way to have a relationship with God, to be forgiven of all of her sins, so that she's no longer thirsting in her soul for a relationship with her Creator. And so that's what Jesus is talking about, but she misses it. She doesn't get that part. And so when she hears this, she says, "Sir, give me this water so that I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming here to draw water." So again, in her mind, she's like, "This is perfect. This is just what I need. I won't even have to leave the house anymore if I get this water." And so Jesus, uh, he's very perceptive. He knew this woman well. He knew her situation, and so he says, "Go look, go call your husband, and come back." And the woman says, "I have no husband." And so then Jesus says, "You were right when you say you have no husband. The fact is, you've had five husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband. What you have just said is quite true." And it's that right there. It's that reason, it's that statement that we know the reality of this woman's situation. We know why she was trying to avoid people and why she was going out of her way to go there at such a weird time of the day. It's because she knew that she was living a lifestyle that was not considered right in God's eyes. It was not considered right in her family's eyes and her village's eyes, certainly in that time, in that culture, in that context. And she knew that everybody was well aware of her situation and what was going on. And so rather than to have to deal with that and deal with these people, she found it easier to just isolate herself. And really the state that she was in was really quite bad, because I mean, you put yourself in that situation. Maybe you've done something that you know you shouldn't do, and you've kind of withdrawn, you've tucked away, and now you feel completely alone. And I mean, she was just trying to get through each day. She was just trying to do her best to make it through. But that's not what Jesus wanted for her. It's not what God wanted for her. And I think ultimately, if she would have done some real searching, she would have admitted that that's really not what she wanted for her life either. So anyway, this encounter continues. Jesus runs into this woman who was completely isolated. She was stuck because she was living in a lifestyle that she knew she shouldn't have been doing, and she didn't know what to do about it other than to hide away. And so as they continued this conversation, if you will, she tries to debate with him for a little bit, and Jesus doesn't really do that with her. But he reveals to her this thing. He says, there has come a time when the true worshipers will worship the Father in the Spirit and in truth. And so when Jesus was having this conversation and when he was talking about this with her, um, he was beginning to show her the things in life that were really most important. And it wasn't about all the religious debates that they were having that time that she was trying to get him trapped in. It was this idea of somebody being right with God and being able to worship God freely, whoever they were, wherever they were. And so the woman's like, "Look, I know that there's this Messiah coming and he's going to tell everything to us." And so Jesus says, "I, the one speaking to you, I am he." And so, for the first time, probably in a very long time, this woman knew who she was talking to. She had had a genuine encounter with the Messiah, with Jesus Christ, with the Son of God. And what he was offering her was forgiveness, freedom from her sin, and basically her ticket to be able to come back into the world, come back into the real world, and join her village and join her family. And even though it doesn't say this in this story, I am quite confident that this woman took Jesus up on that offer, because as soon as Jesus reveals that he was the Messiah that she was that or that that she was talking to, it says that the woman, leaving her water jar, she went back to town and said to the people, "Come see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could this be the Messiah?" So, this isolated, lonely woman has an encounter with Jesus. She realizes that he is the Messiah that has been promised. She knows that he is the one that can give her the forgiveness of the sins and the way of life that she had been living. And I think she believed in him. I think she asked for that forgiveness because of what happens next in this story, and part of it is what I just read. You see, for somebody who was feeling all this guilt and all this shame of living a lifestyle that she knew she shouldn't be living, well, now all of a sudden she's not concerned about isolating herself and avoiding people. She now runs to the very people that she's been trying to hide from to tell them about Jesus and this man that she just met and what he had just did for her. And so that's what God wants for us today. He doesn't want us to be stuck in our sin. He doesn't want us to be stuck in our shame and the guilt and the embarrassment of some of the things that we have in our life that we know shouldn't be there, or some of the things that we've done wrong. He wants us to be free from that. He doesn't want us to withdraw and isolate ourselves from Him. And He certainly doesn't want us to do that from the other people in our lives who care about us. And so, what He does is He offers us a way to experience this freedom, to experience this redemption. What he offers us is the forgiveness from our sins and all of that guilt and shame, so that we no longer have to feel that way, and we no longer have this thing that is making us withdraw and isolate ourselves from other people. And that's exactly what happens with this woman. And so she goes, she tells her village, and eventually the whole village comes out. And we see that many more people in that town came to believe in Jesus Christ because of the testimony of this woman and the fact that she was willing to bring them to him. And so if we just stop and we take a minute to look around, if we look at the reality of the situation that we're in, if we look at the things going on in our world, we can see that there are a lot of lonely people. We can see that there are a lot of people who have isolated themselves and have withdrawn. And we can go into all the different reasons, but part of what contributes to this is just a lot of the times our unwillingness to deal with the things that we know are not right in our lives. And it's our unwillingness to deal with the things that we know we really need to make right. And so, if we want to really begin having an impact on this culture, and if we want to start breaking down a lot of these barriers of isolation, then what better place to start than with ourselves? And look, I know I'm sitting here saying this and I'm making it sound so easy. I know it's not. I know it can be really uncomfortable and really difficult to stop and really reflect on who we are. I know it can be hard to look in the mirror and address the person that is standing in front of us, looking back at us and saying, I know there are some things that I need to get rid of, and I know there are some things that I'm not doing right. I know it's not an easy thing. I know it's difficult, but I'm here to advocate that in order for us to begin breaking down these isolation barriers that we see all throughout our culture, that one of the first things we can do is make sure that we are in a good place, make sure that we are right with God, make sure that we are right with other people. And if we're not, then what we need to do is we need to begin to make things right. Maybe we need to go apologize to somebody. Maybe we need to admit that we were wrong. And certainly we need to ask God for the forgiveness of the sins and the things that we've got going on in our life that we know that we know shouldn't be there. And so that's really what I have for you for this first episode. As we're going to continue our discussion about the other two barriers that I've identified that help contribute to this culture of isolation that we find ourselves in. So, y'all, if you feel like you need to ask God for forgiveness for some things going on in your life, I just encourage you to do that right now. If you want to reach out, if you want to talk to me about what that means or how to do that, I would love to have a conversation with you. I would love to just help walk you through that. And like I said, maybe if it means you've done something to somebody, maybe you need to go ask them for forgiveness. Maybe you need to give them an apology instead of just trying to avoid it and isolate ourselves and isolate those people from our lives too. So, I hope this was beneficial. I hope this was an encouragement. I hope you found this useful for your own life. And so I'm excited for what we're going to be doing and the rest of the things that we're going to be talking about. So join us next week for the second episode of Rising as we talk about the second barrier of isolation, which is really our perception or fears of the way that people are going to react to us. So thank you all for watching. God bless. I hope y'all have a good one.